Hello friends, welcome to the SQL Server video tutorial. This video is basically for the beginners who are new to SQL Server and for the people who want to learn SQL Server by self-learning. The contents for our discussion today are: what is database, RDBMS, what is SQL, history of SQL Server, what can be done using SQL Server, pros and cons of SQL Server and commands in SQL Server. Before we go into details as to what is SQL Server, let me tell you, SQL Server is a database. Okay, then the question is, what is data? Data is any piece of information that can be stored for future purpose. For example, your friend's contact detail can also be called a data. Data for future purposes can be saved in either a text file or an Excel sheet or in some other place, as you can see in the screen now. This is an Excel sheet, this is a text file. You can store friend's name and phone number to use it. This kind of storage is called flat file, but it is usually for small set of data. Flat files are usually not suitable for large data, as storing employee details of an organization. To overcome this, we need some system which should perform the storing, retrieving, manipulating of data and give the output as per a business need. This kind of system is called database management system, as you can see over here. In simple words, RDBMS is a system which provides facility to manage SQL. It can manage data. So now SQL Server is a RDBMS system. Now you will say, what is RDBMS? We know DBMS, this is database management system. RDBMS is a relational database management system. It is a database management system that is based on the relational model introduced by E.F. Codd, which means RDBMS is a DBMS based on the relational model. Relational model is based on the theory of sets and relation of mathematics. In relational model, almost all the information is stored in table, which means RDBMS maintains data in a tabular structure. Now, what is a table? A table is a two-dimensional array containing rows and columns. Some of the frequently used terms in RDBMS are columns. A column is a vertical entity in a table that contains all the information associated with a specific field in a table. It is a finite unit of data. A row is a collection of data in different columns, like row is an entity. Tables is a collection of rows and columns. Database is nothing but collection of tables and other objects. Example for the tabular structure of RDBMS is a student table, which is shown here. You can see the student name is a column and student ID is a column, and you can see the horizontal line 1 is a row, horizontal line 2 you can see is also a row. Now we know that the database is and what DBMS and RDBMS is. Next question is, what is SQL? SQL is a structured query language, which means SQL is a language just like C or C++ language. Every DBMS has its own language to write the commands. All database queries commands are standardized under a common language called structured query language. Now what is a query? Commands that we give to the database to perform some task. SQL is a language used to storing, retrieving, manipulating data in a database. SQL also contains statements for defining and administrating the objects in a database. SQL is a language supported by most relational databases. In simple words, SQL lets you access and manipulate data in database. SQL is a non-procedural language, which means it concentrates on what to do rather than how to do something. Let's move on to the next slide. Now, let me tell you what is the history of SQL Server. In IBM laboratory, SQL was developed in the late 1970s by San Jose. It was originally developed for IBM DB2 product Later, SQL language was used in developing other RDBMS systems like Sybase. In 1987, Sybase released SQL Server for Unix. Later, in 1990s, Microsoft and Sybase together launched SQL Server for Windows NT. For a few years, Sybase continued to develop the Unix version of SQL Server. Microsoft continues to develop the Windows version of SQL Server. In 1995, Microsoft independently released version 6.0 of SQL Server. From then, Microsoft released its own version of SQL Server with various updates. You can see the details in the history of SQL Server, which is shown in slide. Now, we know the origin and history of SQL Server. Now, what can be done using a SQL Server? That's a big question. Now, coming to the tasks and operations that SQL can do. We can create tables, databases, procedures, functions, views, triggers, etc. using SQL. We can insert or load data into SQL Server tables. Data in the tables can be updated using SQL, and we can manipulate the data using SQL queries and fetch the required data as per our user needs. We can set the security permission on databases, tables, procedures, views, so that we can limit the access to the data. Let's say I don't want a particular user to access my database, then we can restrict that user from accessing database by denying the access to that user. So we can say that SQL Server is a very powerful RDBMS, and it is universally accepted, though it has some pros and cons as well. Let's discuss the pros and cons. In SQL, we have relatively very few commands to learn. Entire SQL Server revolves around few common commands like create, insert, update, delete, select, etc. These commands are very easy to learn. This is one of the pros. It has a very good data recovery model. This is as well as another pros. Data corruption is always a concern when power loss or improper shutdowns occur. SQL Server have a lot of features through which we can recover the data. And as well, SQL is a high speed and easy to learn language. It has well-defined standards. Now, what are the cons? In spite of the above listed advantages, SQL have its own disadvantages. We need a good understanding about the concepts, and we should have good knowledge about the queries that we are writing, else wrong queries may yield misleading results. Now, some of the frequently used common commands in SQL Server are create, alter, drop, select, insert, update, truncate. We will discuss more about these commands in later videos. Thank you for watching our videos. Thank you.